Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our ongoing coverage of America's New War. You're looking at a shot taken from New Jersey this morning, looking towards the east and the bottom tip of Manhattan this morning. Smoke continuing to rise from ground zero. Welcome back. I'm Paula Zahn reporting this morning from New York City. Bill Hemmer continues to join us. He is at ground zero. He will file reports all morning long. Joining me from Washington is senior White House correspondent John King. John, you'll be taking a number of questions that we've asked people to email to our team here this morning. I know you're ready. Also in Atlanta at our investigation desk, Miles O'Brien. Wanted to quickly bring you up to date on some of the headlines this morning that I'd love to share with you. What I can tell you in New York City, as we look at some of the folks, pictures of rescuers digging through the rubble, for the first time since the 1800s, since 1883, there will be ferry service from one of the boroughs of New York City, Brooklyn, carrying workers into Manhattan. That is because the Brooklyn Bridge is closed and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel is closed. It is going to be a mess here tomorrow morning, as even though most of the subways are up and running tomorrow, a lot of folks who are going back to work to Monday have not been at their offices since Tuesday, and not all the arteries heading south are open at this hour, so they're going to find difficulty dealing with all this uncertainty. We're going to come back to the broader headlines in just a moment, but I'd like to catch up with Miles, who's standing by at the investigation desk. Miles?
Paulo, just for the latest on America's New War, there has been a second arrest in connection with Tuesday's attacks. Details are pretty sketchy about this, but the Justice Department says the man was wanted as a material witness in all of this. This is the second material witness arrest that we've had to report to you. Pakistan. Significant development here. Pakistan will ask Afghanistan's ruling party to hand over suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden, the prime suspect in all of this, or face the possibility of military action. The head of Pakistan's intelligence agency is expected to take the message to the Taliban, the leaders of Afghanistan, within the next 24 hours. And moving a little closer to home, the U.S. stock markets closed since Tuesday's attacks, will reopen tomorrow morning. The longest shutdown since World War I. The New York Stock Exchange will open with 2 minutes of silence in memory of those who died in the attacks. Now, we know you have questions and comments about the attacks and the potential U.S. response to them. We invite you to send them to us. The address is attack@cnn.com. Our reporters and our experts and everybody we have stationed all around the world will attempt to answer your questions just ahead. So send those in now. Attack@cnn.com. Paula.
And I know, Miles, you're going to take a stab at a lot of those. Look forward to talking to you in a little bit. Earlier this morning, we were on live with Tom Mateer, who has been reporting from Islamabad, Pakistan, talking a little bit about what the reaction is to the Pakistani leadership saying they will send a delegation to Afghanistan tomorrow to demand that the ruling party there, the Taliban, releases Osama bin Laden to them. Right now, I want to go to a report that Tom Mateer just filed just minutes ago with an even more up-to-date perspective.
Sources tell CNN that President Musharraf will indeed send a representative into Kandahar, into Afghanistan, to meet with Mullah Omar tomorrow, and they will provide an ultimatum to the Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden in 3 days or face a huge military operation. We also have been getting some more details about the phone conversation last night between the Pakistani president and U.S. President George W. Bush. What the Pakistanis want for the cooperation in any military operation would be U.S. efforts to relieve the economic suffering here in Pakistan. The U.S. has sanctions in place here, also restructuring the debt of $30 billion here in Pakistan. They also are asking the United States to help Pakistan in its dispute with India over the Kashmir region, that disputed region, asking the United States to play a more active role. And they've also asked that India and Israel not be involved in the operation to get Osama bin Laden, if indeed he is the one they go after, if there is indeed a military operation. Also, they do say that Osama bin Laden, they say holds the key to war or no war in this region. Now, it is a bit unsettling right now what's going on behind the scenes. There is a briefing going on all day long. The Pakistani president has been meeting with editorial writers, scholars, and even religious leaders inside the president's office today to brief them on the cooperation that's going to be offered to the United States. Sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, we expect the Pakistani president to go on national television here and explain it to the people. But there is a bit of confidence building going on right now all day in these meetings, which are expected to run late into the night, maybe up till midnight, trying to explain his government's position to his people.
Once again, that was Tom Mintier filing that report just moments ago from Islamabad, Pakistan. Right now, let's head back to Washington, where John King is standing by. John, before you get into the substance of what you're going to report, if you would put into perspective for us this morning, we know that Pakistan is one of the primary backers of the Taliban, one of 3 governments that actually recognizes its existence. How much power does Pakistan really have over the Taliban at this point with this request it's making?
Well, certainly some would argue very little, but from the U.S. side, the most important part of this development is that Pakistan is not only supporting the United States here, but publicly supporting the United States. A key distinction, perhaps not clear to all our viewers why it makes such a big distinction, but with Pakistan publicly demanding that Mr. bin Laden be turned over, that gives Mr. Bush a huge lift as he tries to build this international coalition. I spoke to a senior administration official just a bit ago who said this is very encouraging. The official went on to say the administration not in any way expecting the Taliban to comply with this request. They say it is very significant that the Pakistani government, after hedging a little bit in those early diplomatic conversations, has decided now not only, it says, to fully cooperate with the United States, but to do so in a very public way. That helps the president.
Okay, John, I thought we were going to report. There are a couple more questions to you about that. The administration saying it's not necessarily expecting the Taliban to comply. So what is it the administration is expecting?
Well, if you listen to what Tom Mintier just said, one clue in there is that if this demand is that the Taliban turn over Osama bin Laden within 3 days, certainly President Bush would not want to undermine a country that is trying to help the United States. So if the United States views this as a serious diplomatic effort by the Pakistani government, perhaps we can read into that we would not see any at least large-scale military operations for at least those 3 days while this was going back and forth. Also helps the administration. We are told by senior officials the president is directly and sternly pressuring the government of Saudi Arabia to break diplomatic ties with the Taliban and to crack down on wealthy Saudi businessmen who supply Mr. bin Laden with financial resources. With Pakistan stepping out in a public way, that gives the administration additional leverage against the Saudi government. Now, for more on all of this and on the president's other challenges, I'd like to bring in my colleague Major Garrett over at the White House. Major, challenge number 1 for the president, building an international coalition, preparing and narrowing down his military options. But as the stock market prepares to reopen on Monday, challenge number 2 for the president, calming the jitters of the American people, perhaps?
Indeed, John, let's take them in order. Challenge number 1, assembling that international coalition. Some positive news for the administration on Saturday. Not just Pakistan's efforts, its public efforts to support the administration generally in a military campaign, should it come to that, against Afghanistan, but now this very aggressive effort endorsed by the president of Pakistan to call for the handing over of Osama bin Laden. Other encouraging developments on Saturday. The Secretary General of the Arab League making it clear that the Arab League, in quotes, stands ready to cooperate after proper consultations from the United States on what would be the action to come. A signal from many Arab states that, in fact, it is willing to stand with the United States if it comes to a military action against Afghanistan or other potential targets on the president's list of military targets, which you so accurately point out he is currently reviewing and re-reviewing. Now, challenge number 2. Trying to get a sense to the American public that though the jitters are legitimate, the jitters are real and all the very well founded, it is time to try to move back towards some of the benchmark routines in American life. That will begin tomorrow. The New York Stock Exchange will reopen, for example. Major League Baseball will start playing baseball games again. President's due to return from Camp David to the White House. It would not at all, John, be a surprise to any of us who cover the White House and this president that he would make some remarks to try to temper the anxiety in the country and try to sort of, if you will, tee up what's going to happen tomorrow. It's a symbolically important day. It's also a important day in all sorts of realistic senses. Moving the country back to some of the routines it has seen put aside since the disastrous events on Tuesday. President probably, though we don't have any confirmation of that officially, will want to try to let the American people know that Monday is an important day and they should try best they can to return to some of those routines.
Even before this tragedy, Major, a great deal of concern within the administration, not only about the U.S. economy, but of the threat, the growing risk of a global recession. Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill will go up to New York to ring the bell to open Wall Street tomorrow morning. All this part of the administration effort to show some confidence behind the scenes. Any sense of what their fears are about the economy at this moment because of this?
Well, you know, John, nobody here wants to even acknowledge what is felt to be a sort of crass consideration about the economy. The focus is so much on all of the massive suffering in New York and in Virginia, and let us not forget in Pennsylvania where another jetliner crashed. So much of the focus of the administration is not only on ministering to those who are suffering, trying to set a tone for the country, developing a military strategy, building an international coalition, all of these manifold challenges to the president, but also, as you say, you cannot ignore, they cannot ignore, the underlying reality that this will have a profound effect on the U.S. economy. And as the U.S. economy goes, we have learned so many times, so goes the global economy, which was already teetering. The United States economy was teetering, moving closer to recession. Fact is, the administration is concerned about it, but it understands and recognizes that there's little it can do right about now to deal with the economy except to try to build that sense of confidence back in the American public that it can return to some of those important routines, and as it does so, perhaps channel some energy back into some of the fundamentals of the U.S. economy, such as consumer spending, things such as that. John?
All right, Major Garrett at the White House, thank you very much. Add one footnote myself. In conversations with senior administration officials this week, we know they have been in consultations with the major sports league asking officials to improve security at stadiums at the very same moment as the president hopes to resume some sense of normalcy with Major League Baseball beginning on Monday. Now I want to turn to Bob Franken over at the Pentagon. Bob, the president coming back to the White House today after a weekend at Camp David spent mulling his military options, meeting with his national security team. As he returns to Washington, what is the mindset over there at the Pentagon?
Well, when the national security team starts mulling, the mulling then moves to the very practical level here at the Pentagon, which of course is still trying to recover from the major hit, of course, it took. The plane crashing into the building 5 days ago, completely destroying a big section of the Pentagon. There was some video that was shot, as a matter of fact, the night before last. And as you go into the building, you see just how massive and destructive the material was. Here we're going in from the outside, what the building looks like from the outside, slowly going into the building. Then we'll go inside and you will see just clutter and debris everywhere. You will see this massive effort to try and shore up things. Here you're seeing pictures that were shot in a distant corridor showing water all over the place. Now you're seeing the many wood beams by the hundreds that have been put up, the thousands, trying to shore up an area so it would be safe to try and recover, try and find bodies. They have found now 86 bodies. They estimate that there will be 188 at all. This is just about 5 days after the plane hit. You can see just how massive the destruction was, as you might expect. And again, those wood beams are really the safety, what protects the workers from collapse. That's always been such a big problem. Wherever you look, you see devastation. Those steel beams, by the way, were part of a reinforcement inside, which caused the area not to collapse immediately, and that saved any number of lives, according to people. There had just been a renovation that was going on. You can see the windows there. Those windows, in fact, stayed intact. They were blast resistant, and it's been a big effort to get the heavy machinery in, as you can see. Offices just knocked askew all over the place. So that's what the situation is inside the Pentagon. In the affected area, John, everybody has been moved from that area, of course, and in the other areas where they've been moved, there is honest planning going on. Planning, first of all, that involves the reserve call-up. 35,000 reservists are in the process of being called up. Plans are being made, specific units being identified, functions being carried out in all the various services for what's called the Homeland Defense. At the same time, other planning for the larger issue, and that is the issue of the retaliation and what the administration is calling a long-range war against terrorism. John?
Bob, as Major Garrett just noted, it can seem at times in poor taste to revisit some of the political debates that were going on in Washington prior to this catastrophe, but one of them I think is relevant. There was a debate not only between the administration and the Congress, but also at times between the military brass and the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, the generals and the admirals looking for billions of dollars in fresh money immediately. They say they didn't have enough money to buy fuels and ammunition and supplies to conduct proper training. This before this tragic event and before the military planning. Any sense of grumbling over at the Pentagon at all that we're not ready for this?
Well, not really. I mean, I think that they believe that that they are more than ready with the massive forces that they have and the specialized forces that they have, by which I mean commando units and that type of thing. But the symptomatic problems you're talking about are long-range problems in the military, problems that they've been trying to solve for a long time. And you add to that the debate over the military expenditures for the missile defense shields, that type of thing. That was all part of it. But right now I think there's a general belief here that the military is ready to do whatever it has to do. Right now they're trying to determine whatever it is it has to do.
All right, CNN's Bob Franken standing watch at the Pentagon. We thank you for that report. And for now, we go back to Paula Zahn in New York.
John, one real quick question for you. I know you cited some CNN polling that said that by and large Americans support military action against whoever was responsible for these attacks. And I know the latest poll in the New York Times, CBS News, also indicates that, that 85% back the action against those responsible. 75% still support a military engagement, even if that risks the deaths of innocent people. Now that the administration has floated the idea that ground troops, U.S. ground troops, might be deployed, is there concern there that that would in any way weaken these numbers?
There is not a concern at the outset that it would weaken these numbers, and the administration is very encouraged from the public support from key members of Congress who say, yes, look, 2 years ago the Clinton administration tried cruise missiles against the bin Laden organization. Obviously that was not successful, or certainly not as successful as that the Clinton administration would have hoped. Democrats as well as Republicans saying some ground options need to be considered here and perhaps might be likely if the president has a military strike. The issue is down the line, Paula, once those ground troops go in, if there are casualties, if there are any retaliatory terrorist acts against the United States when that happens, that will be the key test of public opinion. The administration very happy, very encouraged by the public opinion polling right now, although everyone in the administration would concede the American people quite numb right now. No one is sure any poll taken today is any great reflection of where the American people will be a week or a month from now.
All right, John, thanks so much. Right now we head to northern Afghanistan, where Dr. Abdullah joins me this morning. He is the foreign minister of the Islamic State of Afghanistan. He is the new opposition leader, or the new leader of the opposition to the Taliban. Welcome, sir. As I understand
thank you.
As I understand it, you and your supporters have offered to help turn over Osama bin Laden and his supporters to either Pakistan or the United States. How are you going to do that?
What we have offered is our support in any operation against terrorist camps in Afghanistan, because at the moment we are already fighting against the terrorist groups in Afghanistan, and we lost one of our heroes just yesterday as a result of a terrorist attempt against him, which was connected to Osama bin Laden. So we are fighting the enemy of the world, which I mean Osama bin Laden. If the United States of America is about to show a reaction against terrorists and their collaborators, they should consult us and see what, how much effective our support in our cooperation would be.
You and your regular 15,000 or so supporters are ready to join the fight. How difficult of a task does the U.S. face, and the friendly nations that are supporting this coalition that's being put together in the region? What kind of risks do they face?
At the moment, we don't know. We don't have any idea about the characteristic of the program of the United States, and we don't know how that operation would be launched. I think if there is a serious reaction, they should consider our forces, which is already fighting against terrorists in Afghanistan and have been effective in their fightings against them. I think it wouldn't be an easy task, but it is possible to tackle this menace in Afghanistan by cooperation with the forces which are already fighting against them.
You say it will not be an easy task, and as you've made it very clear this morning, you are more experienced in dealing with Osama bin Laden and his supporters than anybody else. Why haven't you and your followers been able to get Osama bin Laden?
I think since Taliban, which had the full support of Pakistan, they control a large part of the country, and we had made calls to the international community that this problem is increasing day by day, and Osama, Pakistan, and Taliban were given chance in time. It is 5-6 years since Osama is there, and we have been fighting against them, and they are getting stronger day by day. Terrorists from all over the world have joined them. There isn't a balance between our forces and the forces which Taliban gather, or terrorists which are joining Osama in hundreds, if not in thousands, every year.
Do you have any idea where Osama bin Laden is right now? Since 6 days, Mullah Omar and Osama undergone secret, and we haven't been able to find out where they stay. But roughly, of course, we understand that they are in southern Afghanistan, in Kandahar province, in rural areas. This is as much as we know at this moment. There are a lot of questions being asked about your predecessor, Masood, whether he was dead, whether he was alive. Who killed him? Or do you believe him to be dead?
Yes, he was killed by 2 Arab journalists, which they have posed, in fact, as journalists. Those journalists had gone to Pakistan before coming to Afghanistan, and they had been in the areas under Taliban control for some time, and then they were able to make an assassination attempt on 9th of September against Commander Masood, and Commander Masood passed yesterday, and he was buried today. The funeral ceremony was today, this morning, and CNN crew filmed that ceremony.
So he obviously, you think, died from injuries suffering in this suicide bombing on Saturday. Sir, what can you tell us about any movement of Afghanis for the borders in anticipation of a war? Are people trying to get out?
Yes, there have been reports about the borders with the Islamic Republic of Iran as well as with Pakistan. Ordinary people, they are fear of retaliation or military operation. They try to leave Afghanistan en masse. Of course, there should be a clear differentiation or distinction between the ordinary people of Afghanistan, which are against the Taliban and against the terrorist groups in Afghanistan, and the Taliban leadership. The Taliban leadership, they are trying to hide out these days. We received reports since yesterday that in the front lines, which we are facing with the Taliban and with the terrorist groups, the Arabs and Pakistanis are moving away from the front line, or they are evacuating the front lines. While a few days ago there were reports that the leadership of the Taliban, they had gone to the front lines to get away from the centers, which might be the targets of a retaliation operation by the United States. I think somehow they might have seen no action. Now they have gone back to their business, the Taliban leadership, except Mullah Omar, which is in hiding still.
All right. What do you expect tomorrow when a high-level Pakistani delegation descends on Afghanistan and demands that the Taliban turn over Osama bin Laden?
Pakistanis are not supposed to demand the Taliban to turn over Osama. What Pakistanis has to do to cut off support to the Taliban and to halt the recognition of the Taliban government as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Pakistan, is, as you know, is one of the 3 countries which they recognize Taliban as the official government. And the other thing which they can do is to stop supplying Taliban with arms and ammunition. This will diminish Taliban's capacity in launching war in controlling the areas of Afghanistan, while Pakistanis have been trying to deny their support for the Taliban and their influence to the Taliban. If they don't have influence over the Taliban, then it is even worse. They have created a group and continue to support them, while from the other side they claim that they don't have an influence over them. I think this is just an act of getting some more time. If Pakistan succeeds to get time and waste resources, I think it will be a failed operation right from the beginning.
All right, so you sound pretty skeptical of what Pakistan is offering at the moment, but in exchange for its cooperation, what Pakistan wants from the United States is retiring some $30 billion of debt. It wants Pakistan to get involved with the Kashmir dispute with India. Do you believe that if the U.S. follows through with some of those requests, then in fact some of those things that you'd like to see stopped, like the transporting and the supplying of weapons across the border, will stop?
Pakistan will not be able to give that debt to refund that anyway. And from the other side, the Kashmir problem is not something with the United States. It is with India, and it is a dispute which has to be solved between India and Pakistan. Yes, I am skeptical of the Pakistanis' stand, because if they still say that they don't have influence and they have to send delegation, I think it is the same circle, the same vicious circle which the international community has gone through in the past years. When Pakistan was asked to call Taliban not to destroy Buddha statues some times ago, they said that they will send a delegation to the Taliban, while this didn't help. These things have happened in the past, and this is the basis for our skepticism when we heard that Pakistan is trying the same methods once again in a very serious affair.
All right, Abdullah, thank you very much for your perspective this morning. The Foreign Minister of the Islamic State of Afghanistan, the new leader who replaced Massoud, who is represents the opposition to the Taliban. Thank you, joining us this morning by video phone. Back here in New York, the gruesome task of digging through the rubble continues. I want to check in with Bill Hemmer, who joins us from close to ground zero. I think, Bill, we haven't had a chance to mention this enough this morning, but the mayor of New York City continuing to call this a rescue operation until all hope has expired. That's significant, isn't it?
It is, especially for those who are still holding out the possibility that, again, some people may be pulled out of the rubble behind us here. It has been 5 days, though.
Perfect timing.
Going back to last Wednesday, since any survivors were pulled out of the former World Trade Center here in Lower Manhattan. The fire commissioner, Paula, gave us a pretty good description, though, of what he felt was happening. He said, you know, it's one thing to see the rubble above ground, but what we're not seeing, he says, is a volcano-like shape that goes about 7 stories below ground, to give you an indication of how much structure came crashing down on Tuesday morning of last week. Also, Paula, we're seeing the smoke that continues to come out here. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of steam. We're told that the steel that in many cases had heated to well over 1,000 degrees on Tuesday is still hot at this point, and the water hoses that continue to treat that steel, that's what's emitting a lot of that the steam that we're seeing. In fact, NASA released an image over the weekend that we can see clearly from space, that trail of steam that extends for the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island. In fact, when we flew up the other day here in New York, coming in at a low altitude over New Jersey, we could see from 40 miles away, it was the tallest thing on the horizon. Again, that steam trail and smoke trail that leads out into the sky from the former World Trade Center. You know, the numbers are staggering, close to 5,000 still missing at this point, including 300 firefighters. And yesterday here in Manhattan, the fire chaplain had his funeral service held here, and there was one person in attendance who refused to miss that service. CNN's Richard Blystone and his story.
Surgery is going to keep news photographer David Handschuh away from some friends' funerals. But this one he wasn't going to miss, because in the line of duty he saw a lot of Father Mike Judge, the firefighter's chaplain, who was killed Tuesday while giving last rites to a fireman.
He would hold your hand and you would just feel good. He emanated some form of just positive goodwill that nobody else I've ever met could. By just touching you, by putting his hand on you and giving you a hug, you just floated away happy.
Many of those in the overflow crowd had narrow escapes that day. David Hanshew had two.
You hear the sound and then the building starts falling down in slow motion. And I'm a photographer. The initial reaction was to raise the camera and take a picture, but something up here said, just run. And in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've never once run from anything. But it probably saved my life. The wall of debris that came flying down just picked me up and threw me a block.
One leg shattered, the other torn up. Firemen pulled him to a delicatessen. Another photographer captured that moment, but it wasn't over.
When the second building collapsed, the facade of that building was blown in. We were trapped once again. Using their hands and tools and sheer strength and will, they pushed their way out.
For news photographers, cameramen, reporters, days like that are part of an unwritten contract with life. So too with soldiers, policemen, firemen, which doesn't make it much easier. But the thousands still missing downtown, they didn't sign up for this.
I'm so sorry that so many people lost their lives over this. It's not comprehensible. It's not right.
At the end, the photographer pulled out his camera. It may not make much of a picture, but this one's personal. Richard Blystone, CNN, New York.
Richard, thank you. And so many hundreds and possibly even thousands of firefighters from across the country descended on Manhattan to help in the rescue operation. Aileen Pepe is one of them. She's a volunteer firefighter from Keene, New York, upstate New York, near Lake Placid. And when we talk about the missing firefighters, what does it say to you, Aileen, about the job you do and about the job you've come to do here in Manhattan?
How dangerous it really can be and is, and how quickly, it was a very sudden thing that happened to all of them at one time. It wasn't one fireman here, one fireman there. It was 300 instantly. I think that's the first time I've ever heard of something like that happening.
You were at the Pentagon before coming up to New York yesterday.
Yes,
what can you do here and the others who are doing similar jobs?
Whatever we're needed to do. The Pentagon, I answered phones and just helped coordinate volunteers, and here I just moved some debris and supplies and things like that. I wanted to come and rescue people. I'm trained as an EMT, and I was prepared to save lives, and it's pretty depressing to realize that there is nobody there for me to tend to.
How do you feel being here, knowing what you just said? It is really a dramatic statement.
It is. It's, I grew up here. I grew up in Washington Heights, and
wow.
You come through and you see all the firemen walking, exhausted, and the National Guard, and all police, and you see that plume of smoke, and it just doesn't seem real. But I don't know what Bin Laden, they may have known the landscape of New York, but they don't know New York. I mean, I just kind of feel like everybody's looking, hey, Bin Laden, you talking to me? This is New York. You don't know what you're dealing with, who you're dealing with here. This is not, I mean, it's a horrid loss of life, but this is not going to look New York. I mean, no way. No way.
You going back in today?
I believe so. Take a little break, and yeah, I hope.
I know you were hesitant to come on today, but it is appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And, our best to you and everyone else who's involved in the operation.
Thank you.
Aileen Pepe, upstate New York, near Lake Placid.
Thanks.
Again.
Bye-bye.
Paula, clearly Clearly the emotion rings true again, day 6, and again as the stories continue to trickle out. There are so many thousands and thousands of stories that we hear, and just about everybody on the streets of Manhattan has a story that is just so compelling you cannot stop, cannot help but to stop and listen to them because, wow, they tell something that is so tragic and so heartstruck that it can overwhelm you at times. Back to you.
Well, I'll tell you this, Bill, I stand in awe of their strength.
Yeah.
We're going to quickly head back to Atlanta right now where Miles has an update with some new facts for us.
Quick recap for you, Paula. The latest at this moment. The massive search for culprits in this attack has netted a second arrest. Justice officials say a material witness is in custody in New York. He had been among the 25 detainees held by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, now being held by the FBI, facing a material witness warrant. Also, U.S. intelligence is saying it has photographic evidence that links Osama bin Laden to the assault. The images reportedly show a meeting between a hijacker from American Airlines Flight 77, the 757 that flew into the Pentagon, and a suspect in the attack on the USS Cole. You recall that attack was linked to Osama bin Laden's organization. So there you have a link between the USS Cole and this latest attack, the attack on the World Trade Centers in the Pentagon. CNN has learned that within the next 24 hours, Pakistan will ask Afghanistan to turn over Osama bin Laden. A significant development there. Pakistan closely allied with Osama bin Laden over the years. Pakistan saying they will face massive military action otherwise. And investors here in the U.S. and around the world are bracing for a volatile first day of stock trading since Tuesday's attacks. The markets will reopen tomorrow morning, the longest closure since World War I. We can find in-depth coverage of these stories and more at CNN.com. And we also invite you to send us email, questions, comments, anything on your mind this morning. Send it to us to attack@cnn.com, and we'll get to those questions and comments a little bit later. Paula.
Okay, thank you, Miles. On this Sunday, a Sunday that is a day of worship for many Americans across the country, there is a lot of reflection about what happened to our country starting at 8:45 last Tuesday morning. Right now I'm going to check in with Reverend Peter Duganzik, who is the associate pastor of St. Mary's Church. He serves for the Reverend for a parish that is in Manhasset, New York. That is a suburb just about a half hour away from New York City. Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning, Paula. I'd just like to take a moment, too, to thank the people of America, because this community, as you know, has been hit. Many of our members were either working that day, many of our members were in the city, have friends, or were lost. And we believe that the prayers of our great country have been prayers that have helped us through this week.
You just mentioned that some survived from your parish, some are lost. How many people are missing in your parish?
From our parish directly, I believe about 10, but the community itself could be as high as 30 to 35.
And how many people survived of those workers you talked about that worked in the city and that were there that day of the multiple attacks?
I don't even know if I could put a number on it. There are so many that worked in that area, so many that worked in the district, that it would be hard to put a number on those. I've talked to so many who were there that morning, who saw it happen from across the street. It's just been devastating to them.
Have you had any confirmation of deaths, not only at your parish, but in the surrounding community?
None direct. Nobody that we have known has been identified, and so we still hold hope for many of them. We still hold hope that these efforts will yield some miracle somewhere.
What is the message that you will deliver to your parishioners today?
I'm glad you asked that question. Today's gospel is the gospel of the prodigal son, the son who returns to his father, the son whom the father declares as once lost but now found. And the message is going to be a message of hope. The hope that, yes, we have those who are missing and we pray that they will return, but also that message, too, that God does love us. He welcomes us back. God will embrace us in these hours, just as he embraced this lost son. And so that it's God who will ultimately give us, I believe, consolation in all of this.
I think you would have to acknowledge, even though many Americans have great faith, no matter what religion they follow, their faith has certainly been sorely tested this week. Reverend Billy Graham, in a poignant sermon during the National Day of Prayer at the National Cathedral earlier this week, basically told folks who believe that it is okay to be mad at your God. Are you mad at your God?
I don't know if I would use the word mad. I don't know if I would use the word angry, but I am certainly frustrated. I am certainly, and I would say to anyone who comes to me, anybody who would be willing to come in and talk, that same thing. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to project those emotions to God. It's okay to say to God, this hurts, I'm angry, I'm mad. And I have done that, and I do that in my prayer.
I know that St. Mary's has an elementary and a high school that is a part of your community. Reverend Billy Graham also said that it is okay to question why a God would allow such an evil thing to happen. What do you say to children that you come into contact, or what should parents say to their children when their child asks, how could a loving God do this?
And in fact, I have been asked that question by many of the children in several opportunities that I've had to talk with them. And I believe the answer is very simple. It's God is crying with us. God is frustrated with us. The free will that he's given humanity is also a free will that can be abused. And in this case, it is contrary to God's will. An act like this is not in God's plan, but he will help us to rise from this devastation, to love one another once again, and to overcome the pain that we feel through the promises that he gives, the promises of eternal life, the promises of seeing our loved ones again.
What can your parish expect later this week?
We can expect more names to be identified, more of those who are missing. We will be saying prayers throughout the week. We have added additional services for opportunities to pray. We have also added a few services for families who are grieving at the time, families whose loved ones are still missing. And hopefully through all of that, they will be able to see a community of love and a nation that will support them and support our government and our people in this effort as we rise from these ashes.
Reverend Peter Duganczyk, I know this is an extremely painful time for you and your community, and we appreciate your taking out the time to share some of your thoughts with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
We have talked a lot about what has happened in New York City. Not much has been said about the plane that went down in Pennsylvania, but right now, Frank Sesno takes a look at what has happened in the wake of the plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and a reflection on those who perished.
Lost on American Flight 77 from Dulles, bound for Los Angeles. Paul Ambrose. Engaged only 1 week, he was planning to marry his girlfriend in Spain next fall. A doctor with a master's degree in public health, Paul was working with the Surgeon General to address racial disparities in health care. He was not behind the controls that day, but Wilson Bud Flagg was a pilot for American Airlines. He was traveling with his wife Darlene and their friend Barbara Edwards, who taught French and German at a Las Vegas high school. Stephen Jake Jacoby was COO of a paging company, MetroCall, on his way to a conference in California. His colleagues say the fact that his company's service continued during Tuesday's tragedy is a tribute to Jake's hard work. Chandler Keller was an engineer at Boeing and what his wife of 1 year calls a real Renaissance man. She says Chandler cooked, surfed, skied, camped, and could do just about anything. Michelle Heidenberger was another American Airlines employee. For 25 years, she served as a flight attendant. She's survived by her husband, a pilot for U.S. Air, and their 2 children. Michelle's family says she died trying to protect her passengers and her crew. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon around 9:40 a.m. Eastern Time on September 11th, 2001.
Right now, we are going to change our focus, moving from that wealth of human emotion to what is happening politically. Joining me right now is Omar Samad. He is the executive director of the Afghan Information Center. Do I have that title correct, sir?
You have it correct, Paula.
Okay. First of all, your reaction to the fact that a senior Pakistani delegation will head to Afghanistan tomorrow to demand that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden.
Well, as you just heard a few minutes ago in your interview with Dr. Abdullah in the northern parts of Afghanistan and the forces who are fighting against the terrorists and the Taliban, that there's a lot of skepticism about the Pakistani efforts to bring about this kind of arrest of bin Laden from the Taliban. From past experience, Afghans have known that they cannot really trust the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have been intimately involved in Afghan affairs, in the creation of the Taliban, in supporting the Taliban, and that whole network that constitutes bin Laden and his terrorists. Now, we're not saying that all of Pakistan's government is involved, but there are major parts of that establishment that have been guilty of supporting them. So let's hope that the Pakistanis have realized finally that they need to be on the right side of this issue, and that they will have to make some very hard changes in their policies and and come together with the international community in order to get rid of the world of this menace.
Well, it sounds to me you have the same degree of skepticism that Dr. Abdullah has. He basically said that what he thinks the Pakistanis are doing right now is getting more time.
Again, we do have skepticism, but I think that Afghans have a reason for that. As you know, most of Afghanistan is in mourning today because of the loss of their great resistance leader, Ahmad Shah Massoud. And Pakistan had been fighting against Massoud for a long time. Massoud had been warning the world and the United States that Afghanistan and the Taliban and the bin Laden network that is rooted there can be a big threat to the rest of us. And he was proven right, unfortunately, last week with what happened in New York and Washington.
All right, you say that Afghanistan has a reason not to trust Pakistan. What kind of an influence does then Pakistan have over the Taliban? It after all, is one of 3 governments that recognizes the Taliban as the ruling party of Afghanistan.
Well, let's say that Afghans do not trust the Pakistanis. Afghanistan, unfortunately, most of Afghanistan is ruled by the Taliban today. There's a part that's fighting against them. Now, as far as Pakistani support and recognition of the Taliban is concerned, it's something that has existed since 1996. And we all know that the Taliban could not have lasted without this Pakistani logistics and arms and manpower assistance. And we have been talking about this, the Afghans have been talking about this for a long time. Let's hope that now there will be a breakthrough, a change in Pakistani policy, and that the change would be real, and that it will benefit the people of Afghanistan, because it's not the people of Afghanistan who are the enemy. It is basically the terrorists who have taken over in that country and their association with the Taliban. So if we can get rid of this menace, I think Afghanistan would be at peace, and maybe Pakistan itself will also save its own neck from this threat that exists.
But specifically, what kind of breakthrough are you referring to? What are you hoping for?
I think that unfortunately we will have a military attempt on the part of the United States and others in order to eradicate the terrorist networks. The breakthrough will happen on the field militarily, and it has to also happen politically. So the change and the shift of policy with Pakistan, which has to be proven to be real. Again, it is not proven to be real yet, but we'll find out within the next 48 hours probably, will have to come on a military basis and on a political basis. The resistance that exists in Afghanistan today has to be helped, needs to get support in order to assist the international effort against the terrorist networks. There are no other options. Those people on the ground, the Afghans who have been fighting against the Taliban and the bin Laden network, know the terrain, know the people, know the enemy, and know how to go about doing the job. And I guess what they will need is assistance from the United States and others, militarily and otherwise, in order to accomplish this job in a clean manner without hurting the Afghan people, who are themselves victims of this major threat that exists.
Mr. Samad, what is it then that you expect to happen when this Pakistani delegation arrives in Afghanistan tomorrow?
Again, if we were to be optimistic, we hope that they will be able to get assurances and practically show that they are able to get bin Laden out. But unfortunately, it's not just bin Laden. We're talking about a very vast network. There may be other bin Ladens in the pipeline. That's why you need to go to the root of the problem. You need to wipe out the infrastructure, the facilities, and as many of the networks that exist, whether they are financial networks or military networks, logistic networks that exist that support this terrorist activity based in Afghanistan. And it's not just Afghanistan. I mean, they have a lot of support within certain extremist groups in Pakistan, within certain extremist groups in the Arab and Islamic world.
One last question for you, sir. Tom Mintier checked in earlier this morning from Islamabad, Pakistan, and he reported there is a steady outflow of Afghanis towards the Pakistani border, and he said the expectation there is, now that the United States has declared war, that hundreds of thousands of folks are expected to flood to the borders. What do you think is going to happen?
This is such a tragedy. The Afghans who have suffered so much under the Taliban rule, millions are uprooted, displaced, and now you will witness probably hundreds of thousands or millions more Afghans being displaced. This shows that the Afghans are not supporting the Taliban. The Taliban, as you know, have called for a holy war against their enemies and anybody who supports the international effort against the Taliban and bin Laden. So you have to separate the Afghan people from the terrorists. And this shows, as you just said, that the Afghans are leaving. This is their way of voting against the Taliban. They're fearful for obvious reasons, but at the same time, what needs to happen is that the people of Afghanistan needs to be supported from a humanitarian point of view, and that assistance needs to be rendered in order to accommodate these refugees who are fleeing the Taliban tyranny and oppression.
Omar Samad, thank you very much for your insights this morning. Good of you to join us. Just a quick programming note for you all this morning. At noon on Late Edition, Secretary of State Colin Powell will be a guest. You heard a little bit of what the Secretary of State had to say yesterday when he gathered with President Bush and the rest of the members of the cabinet. So that will be well worth watching for an update. Right now, I wanted to bring together my colleagues on television for a roundtable to try to answer some of the smart questions you have posed of all of us here. Joining us again right now is Bill Hemmer, near Ground Zero. John King, Chief White House correspondent, of course, with the commanding view of the Capitol there this morning, and Miles O'Brien from Atlanta. Okay, our first question comes from John Larson, and it is, what made the World Trade Center a desirable target for terrorists? John, you want to go first?
Well, government officials believe simply that it is a monument to capitalism, if you will, that these terrorists targeted the United States government, hitting the Pentagon. They believe the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was targeting either the U.S. Capitol or the White House. So two targets, major government installations to deflate the will of the American people, if you will, about their government. Then you go to downtown Manhattan. It is a monument to capitalism, the World Trade System, a shot at the American psyche, if you will.
All right. Next question comes from Seth Araman. It is, if the Taliban does decide to give Osama bin Laden up, would this mean that the United States would not seek military action against Afghanistan in other terrorist organizations? Bill, you want to take a crack at this? Or Miles?
Yeah. Based on what I'm hearing, and again, I'm on the streets of Manhattan, but it appears at this point that the White House has made up its mind. They're already talking about that three-letter word, war, and it appears at this point that it will be a long engagement. You know, we had a guest on past hour, Paula, who indicated this could go on for 8 years until everyone that the U.S. and its allies believe is responsible will be found and rooted out. The president mentioned smoking them out of their holes yesterday. Quite a description given by the president for how the operation may entail. But clearly you have people in various countries in many parts of the world, including our own country, where here in the U.S., where a number of suspected terrorists may still be possibly planning possible hits. So perhaps the Pentagon could give us a better indication of military action on this. But I think for anyone who's watching, I think in terms of engagement on a military sense, it could be a long process.
All right, John, I can see you want to add a little more to that. Have you heard anybody talk about that possibility? I know I've had so many guests that are very skeptical that the Pakistanis' request will be met with any sort of cooperation. But let's say, for example, the Taliban turns him over. Who would you be going to the war against?
Against his organization. The question would be, would the focus then turn more to financial and diplomatic war, if you will, freezing accounts, trying to track money? The president, as Bill rightly noted, there's an organization out there. The president has consistently said this is not about one person. That is the message you will hear from the administration. They've asked other governments, including allied governments, places like Canada, Great Britain, France, Germany, to crack down on terrorist cells similar to the ones we have discovered in recent days existed here in the United States. And they talk about a bin Laden organization throughout Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world. So the arrest or the turning over of one person would not end this. It might put more of the emphasis on the financial and diplomatic side, but the military would still be part of the equation.
All right, Miles, you've been very patient here this morning. This next question is for you because you have been tracking a lot of this over the last several days. The question is, given the recent revelation that fighter jets were scrambled to intercept the hijacked planes headed for New York, is there any evidence that fighters were scrambled to intercept UA-93, which crashed into Pennsylvania? That one coming from Danny, I hope you get your name right here, Boseljevac.
Well, Danny, we've heard a lot of reports that there might have been an F-16 in reasonable proximity to United Airlines 93, but not close enough to have done anything. If implicit in your question is, did that fighter pilot face that awful decision of whether to bring down a civilian airliner, knowing full well it might be headed toward a significant target and causing the deaths of many other people? The Pentagon has flatly denied that. There's no indication in the wreckage of United Airlines 93 that it was brought down by a U.S. fighter. As a matter of fact, the indications are there was a struggle on board that plane that was initiated by the male passengers, and that brought the flight down. Those male passengers having cell phone conversations with their families on the plane, knowing that aircraft had already gone into the World Trade Center, might very well have seized control of the aircraft and brought it into the ground. The bottom line is, when you look at the timelines here and you look at where fighters are on this short turnaround capability, able to get in the air within 15 minutes time or so, there just simply wasn't enough time for fighters to do anything. By the time they got in the air and made their way to these aircraft, wherever they might be, it was just too late.
All right, Miles, along that note, the Washington Post is reporting that the FAA actually alerted the National Military Air Defense Command that a hijacked jet was headed toward it 12 minutes before the plane hit, but apparently no one relayed that message to the Pentagon. Now, that's what the Washington Post is reporting. Do you have any confirmation of that?
I have heard reports from other sources which have indicated that F-16s were scrambled, in fact, from Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod and from Langley Air Force Base in the suburban Washington area. But once again, if you look at the timelines, and I've looked very closely at those radar tracking replays from the FAA radar information, the amount of time from the moment those aircraft made their sudden deviations, turned off their transponders, and started going way off their flight plans, the amount of time between the initiation of that and the impact at the World Trade Center is probably on the order of 20 minutes. It's just not enough time to have those fighter jets intervene in any way.
All right, thanks so much. We are going to move along to question number 5 here, and it comes from Julia Schneider from Key West, Florida. I guess she must be from Key West, Florida, and maybe emailed this from Germany this morning. My question for CNN is this. We were told the vice president is in Camp David. I would like to know why we have not heard from him in person or in written statements since this tragedy struck. I must admit that his absence has struck a chord of concern. Now, John, I'd love for you to take a stab at that one, because the New York Times had a fascinating account of exactly what happened to Dick Cheney in the moments after the initial blast of the first jet that hit the World Trade Center.
Well, Paula, what happened to Dick Cheney was the Secret Service rushed into his office and said, "Sir, come with us. No questions asked. We're moving, and we're moving now." And they hustled him into a bunker at the White House that is designed to withstand a nuclear attack. That bunker also has a command and control center from which the president or the vice president can direct U.S. military and other operations from. Now, as for moving up to Camp David, the White House has implemented the protocol it has in place for the event of a nuclear attack. That is what the White House has been following, the highest level security protocol. So we will see the president and the vice president at times unannounced moving around. There will be a premium on keeping the vice president and the president at separate locations. So if one is attacked, the other is at a different location. He was moved up to Camp David. There was some concern within the administration, should he make a public statement. We did see him, though, sitting at the president's side yesterday at national security briefings up there. And I would say to all of our viewers, we are in an environment that is unprecedented. The White House telling us there will be some things happening that they will not explain to us. They've asked us to show good judgment in reporting what we know about the president's location at any given moment, because they say there is a threat. So we're in a very unprecedented environment here, and understand the concern of the viewers. We had it as well. Where is the vice president? Why can't we talk to him? But we are assured he is well. We saw him yesterday, and we're going to have to sort this out in the days and weeks and perhaps even months ahead as the administration responds to this.
All right, thanks so much, John. Bill and Miles, we're going to take a short break here as we land very close to the top of the hour. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Paula Zahn reporting from New York this morning. You may hear the faint sound of church bells ringing. They have been ringing all morning long from parishes all across the city this morning. Now, for the very latest from what is happening at Ground Zero, we will have an update on plans for Wall Street's reopening tomorrow. And we're going to check in on Sunday morning church services in Omaha, Nebraska. Also ahead, this.
This doesn't seem possible or believable yet to me, so I just keep expecting him to come back or walk in the door.
Well, she may have a new baby girl, but the little girl no longer has a dad. Unfortunately, not the first time we're going to hear this story. We're also going to take a look inside of the mind of bin Laden and tell you why many believe he was very capable of bankrolling this disaster. Now it's time to update you on some of the other latest developments in America's new war. Pakistan is demanding that the Taliban rulers in Afghanistan hand over Osama bin Laden or face the military wrath of the United States. Wall Street reopens tomorrow morning after the longest shutdown in recent history, but it will not be business as usual. The markets are expected to be volatile as airlines and blue chip firms brace for tough economic times. 22,000 tons of rubble have been hauled away from Ground Zero, but that is just a fraction of the wreckage from the World Trade Center. President Bush has told Americans we are at war, and military reservists will be recalled to active duty for what the Pentagon is calling Operation Noble Eagle. Okay, back to my location here, which is far north of Ground Zero. I wanted to point out that you can still see, 5 days later, smoke coming from Ground Zero. But today we're told some of that smoke is mixed with steam. The steam coming from the fact that rescuers have been hosing down the area overnight. And when the flames underneath, of course, are hit by the air, it restarts this process all over again. Bill Hemmer joins us not far from there right now with an update on how rescue efforts are going. Once again, the mayor saying that this is a rescue operation until all hope is extinguished. Hi, Bill.
Indeed, Paula, good morning once again, 9 a.m. East Coast time, and I can tell you with the sun up right now, quite a bit of activity right now. And the tempo is upbeat. There's a bit of enthusiasm running through here, but again, this is the beginning of another day now, day 6. What I can tell you is the amazing contrast later in the day into the evening hours when the folks who go in then come out. And talking with some folks last night around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, these are people who are big, macho people, 6'4", 6'5". They're steel fabricators who go in and work 12, 14 hours at a time. And to see them walking on the streets of Manhattan after they leave here, a lot of them appear to be like zombies, trying to digest and understand what they have witnessed the previous day, going through body parts and clothing and other articles that they find in the rubble behind us here. But again, they're the lucky ones. They're going home to their families at night, and now we know close to 5,000 at this point still missing. And Paula, we give you the numbers throughout the day here, and to many it may seem like numbers, but they are so much more than that. 4,972 still listed as missing at this point. Only 159 confirmed fatalities, and no survivors have been pulled from the rubble since Wednesday of this past week, which was 5 days ago. It's a painstaking process. We've been reporting throughout the week the body bags that come in, if bodies are found intact, they're removed in their separate bag. But even the smallest of body parts are issued into separate body bags so that down the road, at some point, through DNA testing, those body parts can be identified. More numbers. 22,000 tons of rubble removed as of late yesterday, but some here say that number could reach to 500,000 in total before the entire operation is complete. And some workers coming out throughout the morning here and last night are saying that this process could easily go on for another month, and possibly some are saying it could approach 2 months in length. One thing based on technology in the year 2001, a new method is being used. It was employed late Friday, again on Saturday, through a collection of companies, Sprint, Lucent, AT&T, Verizon. They're calling it Wireless Emergency Response Team. What they're doing is they're asking families who are still missing people to call a number and give the cell phone to this team. They can then use technology to call that number, because these cell phones, if they're still left on, can emit a signal, and it's possible through the rescue efforts they can find those people with that signal being emitted. Going to give you a phone number just in case viewers at home want to get a hold of this one. It's 877-348-8579. Again, 877-348-8579, the number to call again for the Wireless Emergency Response Team. Again, the day is kicking in once again, and tomorrow, Paula, we look forward to the New York Stock Exchange getting back to some semblance of normalcy. It'll be far from normal again, but they do expect trading to begin 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, with the Secretary of the Treasury, Paul O'Neill, helping in ringing that opening bell tomorrow, followed by 2 minutes of silence on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. More on that and a lot more here from what's being considered ground zero in Lower Manhattan. Paula?
But, Bill, I understand, even though the mayor has encouraged folks that have businesses down there to try to get in there today and clean up and try to figure out what they're going to have to deal with tomorrow when, you know, their operations are up and running. The National Guard is blocking still a bunch of streets down there, and some buildings don't even have electricity, right?
Indeed, yeah. We had to walk about a mile when we got dropped off. We got as far south as Canal Street, for those who are familiar with the grid here in Manhattan. Had to walk about a mile, 3/4 of a mile to get to our location. But with regard to Wall Street, they do expect a number of subway stops to be open tomorrow, but still a good number are going to be closed as well. And private traffic, they say, vehicle traffic, will not be allowed just yet. So again, as we start to see signs of life again flicker back to normalcy here, again, Paula, it's going to be a long process that continues throughout the coming week when we start heading back to work tomorrow on Monday.
Boy, Bill, as you were talking, I was just giving an interesting statistic that Con Edison is now saying it's going to have to lay down at least 20 miles of cable.
Wow.
To get electricity restored to that area.
Wow. They talked about electricity being knocked out. They also talked about telephone use being knocked out. And again, there's an ongoing effort to try and restore some of that. The Verizon building, by the way, Paul, it's behind us about 2 blocks, and many of our viewers may have been able to see that from various live locations that we have set up here in southern Manhattan. It is said that there was significant flooding in the basement of that building, and that controls a lot of the telephones and switching in this part of Manhattan. But the effort is ongoing to try and make sure those connections are established. But what we know at this time, it's an all-hands-on effort to try and get things as close to normal as possible.
All right, Bill, thanks. See you in a little bit. It is so disturbing for those of us who live here, and I know many of you have visited here, to look back at the skyline and see what it looks like this morning. And our producers have put together some tape for you to show what the city looked like at least until 8:45 last Tuesday morning. The proud 107 Twin Towers, of course, down in the 2 attacks in New York City. This is what the skyline looks like today. It's still very difficult to make out any of the buildings south of that cloud, still obscured by the smoke and steam. Lots of important things happening on the investigative front, and for that we go to Miles, who's standing by in Atlanta.
All right, thank you very much, Paula. I think it's worth taking a step back for just a moment. The lead story this morning as it relates to the investigation is another arrest. A material witness who was one of the 25 detainees in Immigration and Naturalization Service custody now shifts over into FBI custody, arrested with some material link to this plot. But let's go back for just a moment, take it flight by flight, and talk a little bit about the people who are the alleged hijackers on board. First of all, Flight 11, American Airlines Flight 11. This was the Boston to Los Angeles flight, the one that struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center, the first one. Mohammed Atta. We believe he is 33 years old, and the caveat in all of this is these are the names that were presented, the ID that was presented. They could be so-called cutouts, that is to say they aren't their real names, but nevertheless, 33 years old. Among the places he resided in recent memory was Hamburg, Germany. Remember that. There was a Harburg Technical University on his resume, a town planning major, and he and 2 others on other aircraft apparently were at that university at the same time. He came in and out of the States quite a bit. His last entry into the United States was to Atlanta in July of 2001. Also on that plane, Satam al-Sukami, 25 years old, United Arab Emirates, not much more known about him. Walid M. al-Shari, who also has links to South Florida. All these people on American Airlines Flight 11 had something to do with Hollywood, Florida, Daytona Beach, Florida, and flight schools in and around that area, including Embry-Riddle. Walid al-Shari seated near Atta and seated also near one other of the suspects who we're about to talk about in just a minute. Also, Wael al-Shari, once again, Hollywood, Florida, Newton, Massachusetts, also among the places he had been. Also a holder of a commercial pilot's license. And finally, Abdullah Alamari, once again, Hollywood, Florida, 28 years old, believed to be a pilot. Let's move on to United 175, the second flight to strike the World Trade Center, hitting the South Tower. Marwan al-Shihi, once again, Hamburg is a connection here, studied at the Harburg Technical University, and also spent some time in Hollywood, Florida. The remainder of the hijackers on this flight, Fayez Ahmed, Ahmed al-Ghamdi, Hamza al-Ghamdi, and Mohad al-Shari, all had residences in Delray Beach. So you get the sense that these cells, if you will, these teams were divided geographically at various locations near flight schools all around the country. American Flight 77, Dulles to Los Angeles. This is the one that ended up at the Pentagon. Khalid al-Midar was on that flight, and he lived in the San Diego area. He is the one that we are reporting this morning has been linked to the bombing on the USS Cole. This is perhaps one of the more definitive links to an alleged hijacker and the Osama bin Laden organization. There's surveillance tape taken from Malaysia linking this person to a suspect in the Cole attack. The Cole attack linked to Osama bin Laden. So a couple of steps there, a couple of degrees of separation. information, but nevertheless a linkage between the Cole explosion and thus Osama bin Laden to Khalid al-Mihdhar. Majed Moked, we don't have anything on him. Nawak al-Zami, residences in New Jersey, also in Los Angeles, but also in San Diego. There's a big San Diego connection as well with many of these alleged hijackers. Salam al-Zami, Fort Lee and Wayne, New Jersey as well. And then Hani Hanjour with possible residences in San Diego and Phoenix, where he apparently attended a flight school there. Now, let's move on to United Flight 93. This is the Newark to San Francisco flight. This is the flight which ultimately ended up crashing in Pennsylvania, but was believed to be headed toward the Washington area. Its target unknown. Some have suspected it might have been the U.S. Capitol, for example. Ziad Samir Jarrah. This is an interesting story. Once again, Hamburg is a connection here. The Harburg Technical University. He was an electrical engineering major. Remember, two others on two other flights at the same university at the same time. He attended flight instruction schools in southern Florida once again. And his family in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, CNN's Brent Sadler caught up with them yesterday. A very well-to-do family that had supported his education throughout all these years. Saeed Al-Ghamdi, once again, southern Florida. Delray Beach and Daytona are some of his addresses. Ahmed Al-Aznawi, who apparently was only 20 years old, Delray Beach. And finally, Ahmed Al-Nami, a Delray Beach connection. What you get from this picture is a decentralized series of cells, if you will, teams that were apparently picking individual flights. They tended to work together, train together, live near each other, go to the same flight schools, and yet they were all in separate places. A big question I'm sure investigators have in their mind is how much they knew about each other. Let's bring in CNN's Kelly Arena, who takes care of the Justice Department for us and has a little bit more about this latest arrest, which we told you about right at the top of this report. Kelly, we've been talking about these INS detainees, Immigration and Naturalization Service detainees. Yesterday there were 25 of those. Today there are 24. Pick up the story from there.
That's right. One of those persons has now been handed over to the FBI, arrested as a material witness. That is the second person that the FBI has arrested as a material witness. The first one was also arrested in New York. He was carrying a fake pilot's license at New York's JFK airport. Now, that first person that was arrested, we are told, has not been cooperating with authorities. We do not know whether or not the person that was arrested yesterday has been. But there are two other individuals that we're told are heavily cooperating with authorities, and those were two men that were brought from Texas to New York. Their names are Mohammed Jawed Asmath and Ayub Ali Khan. We do have photos of those two. I'm not sure that we'll be able to, but there they are. We were able to bring them up. They are also in custody, but they're in INS custody. They have not been arrested as material witnesses. Sources have told us that they have extensive knowledge of the terrorist network, Miles, and have provided useful, very helpful information. Beyond that, the FBI has a watch list with over 100 people on it. That watch list has been distributed to all of the authorities, Border Patrol, the FAA, Customs. If any of those persons are found, then they will be detained and held for questioning. We are told that some of the people on that list were people who also trained at U.S. flight schools, but they obviously are not in custody yet. The focus of the investigation is moving towards some central hubs, including New York, New Jersey, and southern Florida, obviously because many of the hijackers had links there, and the FBI and other investigators are hoping to establish a broader network of people to discover if there were indeed operating cells in those areas and if there are still operating cells in those areas. But as one terrorism expert pointed out to me this morning, we don't know what we don't know. And so we really don't know the connection of some of these people. They may have attended the same flight schools. That doesn't necessarily mean that they even knew each other at the time, Miles. I mean, the way that the terrorist organization works is very complex. And so Kelly, there's where we've got it with the investigation to this point.
Let's go back. I got two areas I want to just probe a little further with you. Khan and Asmath, the two detainees that are cooperating or said to be cooperating, they were arrested on a train, but perhaps most ominous in all of this, they were on a flight from Newark to San Antonio, Texas at the time of the attacks Tuesday morning. Our investigators saying, and they were picked up on this train, we're told, with these box cutters, which were the weapons of choice for on the other hijackings. What are investigators saying about this? Was this a thwarted hijacking attempt? Can we say that definitively yet?
They're not going that far. They were actually picked up as a part of a drug bust. I mean, they thought that they were involved in drug running, and so that's how they were actually caught in the first place. And they were found with, we're told, more than $5,000 in cash and those box cutters, which, as you know, were the weapon of choice for the hijackers. Whether or not there was another hijacking thwarted is unclear at this point. And Miles, let me point out, our intelligence sources have been saying all along that they do have evidence that there could be other terrorists still in the United States that haven't left the country, that there were other targets that were planned. However, there is no credible, concrete evidence at this point that points specifically to one target or another right now. The investigators have not been able to put all of those puzzle pieces together to definitively say that, whether or not there was indeed another hijacking. These are all things that are assumed.
Kelly, very quickly, I just want to make sure our viewers are very clear on this, and if you can give me a quick answer because we're just about out of time. If you could just help people understand the difference between being a detainee in the Immigration and Naturalization Service and a material witness.
If you're a detainee, you also happen to be under arrest. It's just that we like to say detainee. By the INS, it's because you have an immigration violation. If you're a material witness, you're being held for one of two reasons, or perhaps both, because you have information that is vital to the criminal investigation, or because you're seen as having that information and you're a flight risk. So it could be and or both in that situation. So that's the distinction.
CNN's Kelly Arena, thank you very much for that update. That was very insightful. Give us a good sense of where this investigation is, unprecedented in size and scope, and truly a global investigation, Paula.
Yeah, I guess that's an understatement, isn't it, Miles? Back here in New York, I think many of you have been watching our coverage. You've gotten used to seeing the enormous displays of support, not only coming for folks who live here full time, but folks who have come here to help. And I wanted to show you a picture of Bellevue Hospital, which is one of those places in the city no one had expected this to happen. This is where New Yorkers and those that are visiting have sort of spontaneously been bringing pictures of the missing, of those presumed dead. And it has turned into a shrine for those that there's still hope of finding, and those that are known to be dead. I wanted to share with you something that came out of the New York Post this morning that I think is quite powerful and kind of represents how a lot of folks are feeling across the country this morning. And it reads, "To mourn and move on. Amazing Grace, how sweet the hymn. It's a beautiful hymn. But it is a funeral hymn, and it will be heard again and again, and New York and the nation lays to rest the casualties of Tuesday's deadly terrorist assaults. It is necessary to remember that those killed on Tuesday were first and last individuals. Each had a family and a future, and for sure they didn't deserve to die the way they did. Welcome to a brave new world." And so now America, and it was in fact the World Trade Center, the rest of the civilized world now stops to mourn. The tears will flow, then they will stop. People will try to get along, and America will proceed with its business of vanquishing its enemies and pursuing its cherished way of life. That is a tall order. It is a struggle for so many folks who are still trying to figure out whether the loved ones are dead or alive. Joining me right now is Nilsa Rivera, whose husband was working on the 110th floor of the North Tower for CBS, where he worked in the transmitter department.
Yes.
When is the last time you saw him? Thank you, by the way, for joining us.
You're welcome. I saw my husband, the last time I saw my husband was Tuesday morning when he kissed me goodbye on his way out to go to work at 6:30 in the morning.
And this is a picture of your husband, and you
yes,
obviously are trying to get as many people to see this as possible.
Absolutely.
You still hope that you will find him alive.
Oh, absolutely. I'm without a doubt still hoping. This is the second time that we're going through this nightmare. And
by that you mean that he was in the same building during the '93 World Trade Center?
Absolutely, Absolutely.
This is a picture of him proud at work?
Yes.
He worked hard, difficult job?
He was a very loyal employee of CBS, and he was very proud to work for this company.
After the first attack, did he feel vulnerable working there?
Yes.
He was at the highest point of this tower.
Absolutely. In his first experience, he was able to contact me and was able to even, sad to say his goodbyes, because he was breathing a lot of black smoke at the time, and he wasn't sure if he was going to make it out alive. That was the last I heard from him. We lost communication, and I didn't see my husband until the following day. That's when I realized, or I found out that he stayed behind to help evacuate lives that were trapped at that bombing, to help the police department, to help the fire department, and to even help CBS stay on air.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Now, let's move ahead to the lost contact you had with him Tuesday. You talked about the last conversation you had.
Yes.
Had anybody been able to get in touch with him after the first crash?
Well, yes. After much struggle to find some information, I did speak to one of his co-workers. I was able to contact her. It was hard for me to get to her, but I was able to contact her, and she told me that, yes, my husband did make 2 phone calls after the explosion occurred.
Do you know to whom?
Her name is Lisa Shaw.
And during those phone calls, what did he have to say?
Well, she told me that he said that there was a bomb exploded and to get some help. And then she told me that the second phone call was that he stated that he was trapped. If he said anything else, I don't know. My husband has always been a chatterbox, and in a situation like this, he would be describing in full detail exactly what is happening, where to go, and even, relay the message to call my wife and, let her know what's happening.
Do you have any reason to believe that he actually was evacuated? I mean, we talk about these Twin Towers being 107 stories, but what we forget is that there were, what constituted the 110th floor is this area where he worked high atop where the transmitter is.
Well, from the media and from, people just talking in the streets, they were saying that they were evacuating people and everyone was cooperating. So, I'm still believing that maybe he may have, escaped, or he may not. Maybe he's locked up in some air pocket somewhere and still holding up, hope, because my husband is a fighter. And, he's a godly man, and, we believe in the power of prayer. And in that last experience, that's the first thing he told me was, Nilsa, call the pastor and call all the brothers and sisters and start a prayer chain. And, I didn't hear from him this time, but that's the first thing I did.
This may sound like an insensitive question, but I don't mean this way, because the mayor is asking for everybody to cooperate, and it looks like you're heeding his warning, because he's asking families if they know of any specific identifying marks on their loved one to make sure you share that with officials. What is the significance of what you're showing us on this poster that you have created?
My husband has a black mole on the left side of his cheek, and he has some black spots here that were created from him shaving. I also bought him for Father's Day a gold rope chain with a charm that says Jesus is Lord. And that's very dear to him. That's very dear to us.
But this is the kind of information that investigators are actually asking for. So when people go down in the Armory Center, this is the reality of what they've got to deal with.
Yes.
That has got to be so hard.
It is very hard, but the Armory is a place that, has made a very strong impact in my life, because I have never seen so many people come together in unity with so much love and affection, and their heart goes out to each and every one of us. It's very hard to walk in there and have to bring identifiable possessions that belong to your loved ones and turn them into the medical examiner for fear that something may happen that, this will identify them. Turning in toothbrushes, turning in his razors, turning in his dental records. That's very traumatizing.
That's brutal.
Absolutely, and all you could do is break down and cry time and time and again, and you have all these people that just reach out to you. They don't know you, but they hug you, they cry with you, they pray with you, they sit with you, they give you comforting words. People you've never seen before. It's amazing. I am just in awe of all the support that we're getting in this city.
Well, I think the rest of the nation stands in awe of what you all are doing and what you have to face. Nilsa Rivera, thank you very much for sharing your story. Good luck.
You're very welcome.
Right now, we're going to turn back to Washington, D.C., where John King is standing by with some new developments, that is, from the nation's capital. Hi, John.
Hello to you, Paula. Vice President Dick Cheney out this morning on NBC's Meet the Press. I want to read you a quote from him, spoken just a short time ago. I have no doubt that he and his organization played a significant role in this. Mr. Cheney referring to the Saudi terrorist Osama bin Laden. He also went on to say, echoing the president's words yesterday, that Mr. bin Laden and his organization are the prime suspects here. And again, as the administration tries to prepare the American people for a sustained campaign, a military campaign, but also a financial and diplomatic campaign, the vice president said the war on terrorism could take years. Now, for more on this, I want to bring in my colleague Kelly Wallace, who's been tracking the president and the debate of the national security team this weekend up at the presidential retreat of Camp David. Kelly, as the president debates his military options, he also has a significant challenge trying to calm the jitters of the American public, does he not?
Absolutely, John. That is a very big challenge for the president. And the way he's going to handle that, as you know, White House officials say, is to take every chance he can to do a couple of things, give a couple of messages to the American people. One, letting the American people know that this campaign against terrorism, this military, political, and economic campaign against terrorism will not be an overnight solution, that it will take time and that it won't be easy. At the same time, though, John, he is urging the American people to get back to work, to go to their jobs on Monday. He is saying he's hoping, of course, the American economy will continue to go on. Some reassuring signals will come when Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill rings the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow. Mr. Bush also noting yesterday when he talked to reporters, Major League Baseball about to begin on Monday. The president saying, John, then that it is important for America to get on about its life, but by no means will it be business as usual. The president will continue, of course, to use the bully pulpit to remember those who lost their lives in the tragedies in New York, Pennsylvania, and in Virginia, and of course to console those who are still have their loved ones missing. And at the same time, he's telling the American people that the administration will continue to take every step, every possible measure it can to protect the American people. So that might mean it might take a little bit longer to board flights because of security measures. So again, not business as usual, but the president trying to tell people to start going on with their lives, but at the same time remembering, of course, this deep, deep tragedy. John?
All right, Kelly Wallace up at Camp David, thank you. I want to continue this conversation now with Jay Carney, White House correspondent for Time magazine. This an event that transformed the nation, certainly transformed the Bush presidency as well. I want to share with us your reporting. The president is flying back to Washington. He's aboard Air Force One on Tuesday. At the time, the government thinks there could still be potentially 2 or 3 or 4 more potential hijacks out there, and they come to the president and he has to make a very difficult decision, doesn't he?
John, George W. Bush had to make a decision in this, his 8th month as president, that few presidents would ever have to make, and it was so daunting, it gives you chills. In a conversation with Dick Cheney, the vice president, with whom he was speaking every 30 minutes from Air Force One, they had to decide if, in fact, there was another plane out there that had been hijacked, would they authorize U.S. military jets to shoot it down? So the president had to decide whether he would take lives in order to save lives, take American lives, potentially, in order to save lives. And he and Dick Cheney decided they would. As a last resort, they gave the order. If a plane did not respond, did not divert from its apparent target, shoot it down.
This is a president who came to office with a domestic agenda of cutting taxes, also a moral agenda, if you will, restoring decency and civility to Washington. Yet he himself said the other day, the American people need to understand this. This, meaning the war on terrorism, is now the singular mission, the fundamental mission of my presidency. How did we see a transformation of the president himself this past week?
Well, it was a slow development. I would say that those first 48 hours for the president, that he was not his best self. I mean, he was certainly better, I think, Thursday and Friday. He had, I was actually on Air Force One in the pool on that first day, and at the Air Force Base in Barksdale, I think he was a little tentative, a little shaky. And then as the days progressed, I think he found his voice. And I really think the moment might have been right after he made that public phone call to Governor Pataki in New York and Mayor Giuliani, which I think was kind of awkward and poorly staged. And it seemed to, I think, those of us who watched it, that the president was sort of trying to share in a little of Giuliani's reflected heroism because everyone's been praising him so much. The moment he got off that phone call, he took some questions from reporters, and we saw a president who was not scripted, extremely emotional, who was talking about leading everyone towards victory in this war against terrorism, and then got a little teary talking about the families of the victims of this tragedy. So I really think that was a transition point for him, because then on Friday I think he gave an excellent speech at the National Cathedral, and I think his very impromptu and brief remarks on the rubble at the site of the World Trade Center were very powerful and effective.
A great deal of confusion, obviously, in those early hours. One of the debates brewing in Washington, some White House officials have suggested that plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh could have potentially been targeting Air Force One, yet in its own briefings to key members of Congress, we're told the administration identified Camp David, the Capitol, or the White House as the potential targets for that plane. This confusion, this exaggeration on the White House part?
I think they were extremely sensitive to criticism that the president did not return to Washington quickly enough. There was that period Tuesday afternoon where not only Democrats but Republicans were saying privately, where's the president? Why is he? Nobody knew where we were or where the president was as he was flying around until he got to different places. And in response to criticism, in particular William Safire's column in the New York Times, I think they took it a step too far. Clearly the White House was a perceived target and a potential target, very dangerous. They had to evacuate it. The plane hit the Pentagon. I don't think anybody would suggest that it wasn't right to assume that the White House was a target, and law enforcement agencies say that they felt it was. But to say that Air Force One was a target, our reporting with law enforcement agencies suggests that at the very least it's an exaggeration. Air Force One, in fact, we were being told on Tuesday and Wednesday by people who were trying to defend the Bush administration and their decisions that one of the reasons why the president stayed aloft was because Air Force One was one of the safest places he could be, not a dangerous place to be. So I think they were defensive, and they probably spun that one a little too far.
All right, Jay Carney of Time Magazine, thank you very much. You can read Jay's reporting on this trying week for the president in the latest issue of Time, the upcoming issue, of Time Magazine, which on the cover shows a picture of President Bush standing amid those relief workers in New York City, speaking through a bullhorn just the other day. Now for more, we go back to Paula Zahn in New York.
Thanks, John. In a lot of places of worship across the country today, there is much reflection about the terror of what this country has been exposed to. We take you now to the Salem Baptist Church in Omaha, Nebraska, for a sense of how people are dealing with this terrible tragedy that has struck our country.
Has he been good to anybody this morning? High five somebody and say, he's been good to me. God has been so.
Obviously, this congregation trying to focus in on the combined strength of its parishioners and any sense of hope people can find during this extremely disturbing time of our country's history. If you were with us earlier this morning, you might have heard some of the questions some of you posed to our panel, many of them dealing with Osama bin Laden, who not only has Secretary of State Colin Powell declared as a prime suspect, even President Bush declared as a prime suspect yesterday. Mike Betcher now gives us an extensive look at who Osama bin Laden is, where he gets his money, and what he intends to accomplish.
It came without warning. A catastrophic attack on the World Trade Center. Less than an hour later, another terrorist strike at the heart of U.S. military might.
live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
Swirling amid the clouds of smoke billowing from these symbols of power, the terrible question: who could be behind such a devastating act of terrorism? The evidence is still being examined. One name tops the list of suspects. It's a name that's been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for years: Osama bin Laden.
His organization has both the suicide bombers willing to die in these kinds of attacks. It also has the pilots. It's had a history of training pilots. And also it has basically the level of kind of sophistication and coordination to bring off something like this.
The 44-year-old bin Laden, through a spokesman, denies any involvement. But according to a Palestinian journalist, he congratulated those who carried out the deadly attacks. The ruling Taliban government of Afghanistan, the country where bin Laden is believed to be in hiding, says the Islamic extremists could not be responsible. In Western intelligence circles, bin Laden has been well known for years for this document: a call for jihad, or holy war, against the thousands of U.S. soldiers now stationed in Saudi Arabia. That call to jihad came after 2 bombings of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. The first in Riyadh in 1995, 7 dead. The second in Dhahran in 1996, 19 dead, hundreds injured. Bin Laden discussed that call to arms in his first ever television interview with CNN in 1997.
We declared a jihad, a holy war against the United States government because it's unjust, criminal, and tyrannical.
Bin Laden wants U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia. He opposes U.S. bombing campaigns in Iraq. He is against U.S. support of Israel. And he objects to U.S. backing of Arab nations he deems un-Islamic, such as Egypt. Bin Laden has been indicted as the mastermind behind the bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in Africa that killed 224 people in 1998. He is a prime suspect in the bombing of the USS Cole last October. That blast killed 17 U.S. sailors. And the U.S. State Department has linked him to the first attack on the World Trade Center in February of 1993. 6 people were killed and thousands injured.
The man is ruthless, and he believes that he should declare war against the United States. And this kind of appeal, this kind of call actually appealed to many young Muslims all over the world.
A videotape circulating around the Middle East and on the internet surfaced just 3 months ago. It shows bin Laden training young militants, some who seem as young as 11, for his holy war. Bin Laden makes an impassioned plea for recruits in the 2-hour tape. The videotape also hints that bin Laden is planning additional anti-American operations.
One thing that bin Laden does before a big attack happens is that he subtly indicates several months before, or a couple of months before, that something's in the works.
The man codenamed the Contractor has used his enormous wealth to advance those militant plans. He was born the son of a multimillionaire Saudi construction magnate. He's the 17th of 52 children, some of whom live in the United States. His father died when he was 10. The family construction business, the largest in Saudi Arabia, is now worth an estimated $5 billion. Osama bin Laden's first marriage was to a Syrian cousin at the age of 17.
His education took place at quite a good university in Saudi Arabia, where he studied public administration, economics. He'd also already participated a little bit in the family business. From a young age, he was involved in the family business. This is not an unsophisticated guy. This is somebody who comes from one of the most well-connected families in Saudi Arabia, one of the richest.
He would later draw on the resources of his family business and his experience as a demolitions expert. After the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, his life would take a radical turn. Bin Laden has been in Afghanistan on and off since the 1980s, when he joined the Afghan resistance in its war against the Soviet Union. At 23 years of age and deeply religious, Osama bin Laden left his comfortable life in Saudi Arabia to fight alongside thousands of volunteers from the Islamic world. He used his family wealth, construction equipment, and demolition expertise to help in the crusade, and he would become a leader of the so-called Afghan Arabs.
Because of that, a lot of people wanted to participate in jihad, and they thought that Osama is an important figure. But he was not only willing to put his money, but he actually gone there himself and fought himself and get hurt.
The Afghan war changed bin Laden. He saw a lightly armed guerrilla force defeat a superpower.
In this jihad, the biggest benefit was the myth of the superpower was destroyed, not only in my mind, but also in the minds of all Muslims.
The Afghan war also radicalized those who fought there.
These Saudis who went and fought became convinced that you simply didn't have to accept regimes as they were, that as a Muslim you could take action against a ruling government.
For the U.S., there is a sad irony to bin Laden's current holy war. American tax dollars once helped support people aligned with bin Laden. During the 1980s, via the CIA, the United States poured $3 billion into the Afghan resistance that was fighting to drive the Soviets out of Afghanistan.
It is true that some remnants of those Afghan fighters, including bin Laden, have used their military knowledge and their skills to branch out into international terrorism.
Indeed, many of the Afghan freedom fighters are among the thousands of committed followers bin Laden has today throughout the Middle East.
They are either direct followers, taking direct command and order from bin Laden, or they are small cells and groups who believe bin Laden is a godfather. His message is almost like a religious order.
After the Afghan war, bin Laden became disillusioned with the Saudi regime, deeming it insufficiently Islamic. He moved to the Sudan. 5 years later, under U.S. and Saudi pressure, bin Laden was expelled from the Sudan. Bin Laden took refuge in Afghanistan, perhaps the only country in the world that would accept him. It was here in 1997 that then CNN producer Peter Bergen caught up with him.
And we went to Afghanistan, to the tiny town of Jalalabad, which is in the eastern Afghanistan, waited around for quite some time. Finally, bin Laden's media advisor came and talked to us. He said, you can only bring the clothes you're wearing, don't bring any watches, don't bring anything that might secrete some sort of tracking device. We took a curtain van, along a road, along a river. It was by now getting to be dusk. We were given kind of sunglasses, which basically they weren't blindfolds, but you couldn't see through these things. We finally got to this hut about 5,000–6,000 feet up in the Afghan mountains. It was March, so it was pretty cold. Suddenly bin Laden appears out of the darkness.
In our 1997 interview, bin Laden expressed why he so hates America.
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims, who are more than 1 billion people in the world today. For this and other acts of aggression and injustice, we have declared jihad against the U.S.
Bin Laden said the jihad was aimed principally at U.S. government targets overseas.
We have focused declaration of jihad on striking at the U.S. soldiers inside Arabia, the country of the two holy places, Mecca and Medina. In our religion, it is not permissible for any non-Muslims to stay in Arabia. Therefore, even though the American civilians are not targeted in our plan, they must leave. We do not guarantee their safety.
When this guy delivers his statements attacking the U.S. presence or his call for jihad, he is justifying these actions in very explicit Quranic, Islamic terms with a law. It's like a careful legal brief that he's drawn up here.
And bin Laden and his followers have backed up his call for jihad time and again. Somalia, 1992. 28,000 U.S. troops are dispatched on a humanitarian mission to a Muslim nation embroiled in famine and civil war. U.S. soldiers are caught in the crossfire. 18 are killed. In his first admission to a U.S. news organization, bin Laden says Arabs who fought in Afghanistan, men who looked to him as a leader, killed those U.S. troops.
Resistance started against the American invasion because Muslims did not believe the U.S. allegations that they came to save the Somalis. With Allah's grace, Muslims in Somalia cooperated with some Arab holy warriors who were in Afghanistan. Together, they killed large numbers of American occupation troops.
He's brazenly said that his people were responsible for that, so we take him at his word.
Rainwater! It is not the only attack on U.S. troops linked to bin Laden. The U.S. government says that bin Laden forces attempted to bomb U.S. servicemen on their way to Somalia. The bomb killed 2, but no U.S. soldiers. Then there is the possibility of a bin Laden connection to 2 bombings in Saudi Arabia, at Riyadh in 1995 and Dhahran in 1996, that left a total of 24 U.S. troops dead.
It's no secret that during the 2 explosions I was not in Saudi Arabia, but I have great respect for the people who did this. They are heroes. What they did is a big honor that I miss participating in.
The Saudi government accused these Saudi citizens of planting the Riyadh bomb. 3 of the 4 men were Afghan Arabs who fought in the war against the Soviets. They acknowledged their role, probably under duress, and were later executed.
According to experience in explosives which I gained during the Afghan war, I assembled the bombs in this car.
They also acknowledged bin Laden's teaching.
We received pamphlets from Osama bin Laden and others.
The U.S. government also points to bin Laden's circumstantial ties to the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. Ramzi Youssef, mastermind of that attack, afterwards fled to Pakistan, where he lived in a guest house for Islamic radicals funded by bin Laden. Bin Laden denies this.
I don't know Ramzi Youssef. What the American government and Pakistani intelligence has been reporting isn't true at all.
The man considered the spiritual leader of Ramzi Youssef's and the 1993 World Trade Center bombers, Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, also has links to bin Laden. The State Department says that bin Laden finances a training camp in Afghanistan for 2 Egyptian terrorist groups that look to Sheikh Rahman as their spiritual leader.
Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman is a Muslim scholar well known all over the Muslim world. He represents the kind of injustice that is adopted by the U.S. A baseless case was fabricated against him, even though he is a blind old man.
In 1998, Rahman's sons joined forces with bin Laden. During a rare press conference in Afghanistan, bin Laden dropped hints of another strike at U.S. interest overseas.
He talked about good news in coming weeks.
9 weeks later, it would become clear exactly what that good news was.
He's alive! He's alive! He's alive!
On August 7, 1998, at about 10:30 a.m., a car bomb exploded outside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya. 9 minutes later, and hundreds of miles to the south, another explosion outside another American embassy. This one in the Tanzanian capital of Dar es Salaam. More than 200 people were killed in the 2-pronged attack. One of the plotters, carrying a poorly forged passport, was detained at Pakistan's Karachi airport just hours after the bomb went off. He later confessed his involvement to intelligence officials. Another suspect was arrested by Kenyan officials and handed over to FBI agents. He confessed to his role in the bombing during a week of interrogations. Bin Laden was later implicated in the attack.
On the embassy bombings, you've got the best law enforcement case indicating bin Laden's involvement. You have the plea bargain of one of the senior members of the organization basically saying, he sent me to Kenya in 1993 to go and photograph the embassy there, and then when I showed him the photographs, he said, that's where we can put the truck bomb. Case closed.
13 days after the bombing, U.S. cruise missiles rained on bin Laden targets in Afghanistan and Sudan.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan.
But bin Laden emerged unharmed. He and his key aides had anticipated the U.S. would retaliate and vacated their main training camp in eastern Afghanistan. The unsuccessful attack elevated bin Laden to cult figure status among Muslim fundamentalists. New Year's Eve 2000. Amid fears concerning the Y2K bug, a different kind of catastrophe was waiting to happen. Terrorist plans to attack celebrations in Seattle, bomb LAX airport in Los Angeles, sink a U.S. warship refueling in the Middle East, and bomb tourist sites in Jordan. The attacks were foiled. They were linked to followers of bin Laden. Later last year, on October 12th, an attack that didn't fail. Two suicide bombers pulled a small boat alongside the USS Cole as it was refueling in Yemen. The blast blew a hole the size of a house in the hull of the Navy destroyer and killed 17 U.S. sailors. U.S. intelligence officials say bin Laden's fingerprints are unmistakable. During the last several years, it is believed bin Laden has been hiding out in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, a rugged terrain he knows very well. The country is dominated by the Taliban, a movement of religious students turned warriors who have imposed their harsh interpretation of Islam. The Taliban have declared that bin Laden is their guest, providing he does not attack other nations. The shadowy figure made a rare public appearance in a videotape that emerged from Afghanistan at the beginning of this year. It shows bin Laden at the wedding of his son to the daughter of a longtime aide. So far, bin Laden's elusive ways have kept him beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. He is thought to change his residence continually, often moving at night. But he still manages to get his message out.
They've essentially fused two very different things. One is a sort of almost medieval reading of Holy War, based on some medieval Muslim scholars with the most up-to-date technologies available today. I mean, bin Laden and his folks use satellite phones. They use the internet to get their message out.
Bin Laden's latest message, in the propaganda recruiting video that surfaced this summer, implies more action aimed against the United States.
On the tape, bin Laden specifically says, basically, I was responsible for these series of anti-American attacks, including the Cole in Yemen, and he concludes the tape by saying, the victory of Yemen will continue.
In his interview with CNN back in 1997, he made this chilling warning about his future plans.
You'll see them and hear about them in the media, God willing.
No one will soon forget what twin terrorist attacks impact that had on the city here. Right now, you're looking at the shot at the round-the-clock rescue and cleanup activities. The FBI now calling this the largest crime scene ever on U.S. soil. It was expanded overnight when a passport belonging to one of the hijackers was discovered in the afternoon, several blocks from the crash site. That prompted the FBI and the police to widen the search area beyond the immediate crash site. In New York, the number of missing seems to be growing. That number has now risen to over 5,000. And right now, CNN's Ann McDermott takes a look at one man whose life appears to be have been wiped out when his plane, American Airlines Flight 11, crashed into one of the Twin Towers.
This is supposed to be such a happy time for Kelly Lee. She's just had a baby, her second little girl. But just 2 days before the birth of Allison Danielle, Kelly's husband Dan was killed. He was on board American Airlines Flight 11 on Tuesday morning.
This doesn't seem possible or believable yet to me, so I just keep expecting him to come back or walk in the door and be here at some point.
Dan was a stage carpenter for the Backstreet Boys and left the tour in Boston to come home for the birth of his baby.
He called at 2 a.m. that morning, his time in Boston, and he just said, you know, he'd be home soon, and he loved us.
Later that morning, when Kelly saw that all hell was breaking loose in Manhattan, she called her family. She called Dan's friends.
Because we kept hoping Tuesday that he'd missed his flight. He overslept her because he'd only had like 3 hours sleep before the flight. And they said all he could talk about was how happy he was to come home. So they knew he'd be on it.
And he was. And now his oldest daughter keeps breaking Kelly's heart over and over again. She's been told her daddy is dead, but she doesn't know what that means.
She keeps telling me he'll be back in 5